This episode of the Fight Within podcast is presented to you by Meguiar's. For over 115 years, Meguiar's has been carefully creating and producing advanced formulas with cutting-edge chemistry to deliver a show car perfect appearance. Whether you're showing on the fairway, finalizing your car for auction, or simply getting your beloved car ready for a weekend drive, Meguiar's is ready to help with their premium car care products to make every automotive surface look its absolute best. Meguiar's, reflect your passion. Make sure to visit them at meguiars.com.
What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Fight Within podcast. Today's guest is Mr. Jordan Hansen.
The one and only.
He is the lead pastor of Mesa Church here in Orange County.
Can you say it proper?
Can I say it proper?
Yeah.
Proper 12 whiskey?
No, say it.
Say
Say it in Spanish.
Jordan?
No. Mesa Church.
Mesa.
Thank you.
Mesa Church.
Thank you.
In Orange County. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate your time. I know that, especially as a pastor, you're probably being pulled in a million different directions, and there's always somewhere you got to be. So tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say, I haven't met a ton of people that like wake up or a kid dreaming to be a pastor. I was just actually talking to Ben's dad, and he had really good perspective, saying that like, you have to be someone's friend, someone's brother, their counselor. They're like you have to be everything to them.
Mentor, teacher,
every single
perfect.
thing. Yeah.
You're not allowed to be, flawless, or you have to be flawless.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Crazy. So tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you ended up where you're at now.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me here.
Of course.
Really cool studio. Grateful to Ben and Manny. My name's Jordan, and I actually grew up in Washington State, but went to seminary in the Midwest, in Missouri, actually. And after seminary, came out to Southern California in Santa Ana, actually at the church that Ben grew up at.
Yeah.
And did we meet at that point? I don't think we met.
I was already gone. I was in the Marines already.
Yeah, so you were in the Marines.
Isn't that crazy?
That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, so weird. It is weird how like lives like do that. God seems to enjoy that. But after that, went back to Missouri to be a young adults pastor. Was there for 4 years, and then got married, and then we moved to Tennessee. So it's kind of funny because so many people in California right now are moving to places like Tennessee, and we came from Tennessee about 6 years ago to Orange County to pastor. At the time, it was called Newport Mesa Church, and we changed our name last year to Mesa Church. So
okay,
Mesa.
But what was in you? Did you always want to be a pastor? Did you know that, or what led you into wanting to be a pastor?
I grew up in a Christian home. However, my dad was a police officer when I was born, and he got hit in the face with a beer bottle and woke up the next morning and was like, I need to get into something that's a little more sustainable because I've got 4 kids, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this my whole life. And crazy thing is he went into law school. So my dad gets enrolled in law school at Gonzaga in Spokane. People call it Spokane. No, Spokane, Washington. And got his law degree, and he became an assistant attorney general for the state of Washington.
Ooh.
So I kind of saw my dad go through these transitions like in elementary school, and when I was in 4th grade, I'm kind of shortening the story, but he planted a church. So I'm in like 4th, 5th grade, and I am now all of a sudden on a church planting team, because when you're the son of a church planter, like, church planners use anyone they can get,
Yeah.
So 4th, 5th grader, I'm on the setup, tear down team and the sound team, and that kind of gave me a taste of ministry. And so, a lot of pastors' kids like run away from ministry, and I, just seeing what my dad went through, I certainly could have run away from ministry for sure, but I felt God calling me into it, and I kind of felt like that's what he had for me at the age of 14. There was a service that I'll, even talking about it, like kind of like arouses like emotions from that night. But just hearing like the Lord call me into ministry was a very powerful moment in my life. There's some things that like happened that night that I still to this day probably can't fully explain, except that God, was kind of opening my eyes to a future. So I knew from the time I was 14 that I was going to go into ministry. I never knew necessarily if I was like going to get paid to do it, but I felt called to like preach and teach God's word. And so even at the age of 14, I knew I would go to seminary and get a master's degree in divinity. At age 14, I didn't know what that meant necessarily.
Yeah.
So I started to explore it, and went on to get a business degree, but then I went on to seminary and got a master's degree in divinity. So, yeah, that's kind of a like shortened version of like what drew me into it. But
So since you're a pastor, I want to
Yeah.
ask you this, because I love, I love the story. I love you knowing that you're called to do something. But what was it where it was like, yeah, I'm called. I know I have to do this, because I didn't grow up in the church.
yeah,
And so being saved or being a believer later in life, I would hate when people were like, just leave it to God. Like, just pray about it. And I'm like, what? How?
yeah.
Like, what does that mean, leave it
Yeah.
to God? What do you mean, just pray about it? Like, yeah, everything's going to get fixed. Like, that's not true. So what was it for you? Like, you say you were called. What happened? Like, how do you know that you were called? Where God was like, you are going to do this.
Yeah.
You know for a fact. Obviously, there's way more to the story, but what was it for you, or that moment where it was like, I know that this is my calling.
Yeah.
I know this is my purpose, because even at 34, I don't know what my purpose fully is. I know what I love to do. I know I love helping people. I love connecting people. But I don't know what my calling is. Like, this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Like, I don't know what that is. And I'm completely okay saying that.
I love this question. We may talk about this for the rest of this episode.
That works for me.
And I think a lot of people have many similar questions regarding it. I think first I would say it's different with every person.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the crazy thing. Like, if I'm preaching to a room of 100 people, I will have 100 different ways of interpreting what I just said.
Yeah.
So now think about God's perspective. Like, he is speaking to billions of people, and they all have like a different way of receiving. Like, even like with your kids, you learn, like, you can't speak to them all in the same way because they're different. Their personalities are different. So I think some of it is just understanding like your personality. For me, the other thing I would say is I think something like a calling or purpose, which are very similar, maybe a little different, nuanced, but is that it's punctiliar, but it's also a process.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think about the way that, you dated your wife. Like, you talk to some people and they're like, the moment I saw her, I knew.
Yeah.
But then other people, it's like, the moment I saw her, I thought she was beautiful, but then we went on dates and I got to know her, and over time, like, it was something that solidified more and more in my heart. I think that there is a lot of similarity to what we're talking about, because God is relational, and hearing his voice is, it's relational. Like, Moses at the burning bush, I think, knew. Like, there was this punctiliar moment where he just knew. But then he had to work out what that meant over the course of like the next, few years. I can say like there was a moment that I knew, but there have been seasons where I really truly questioned that moment. Yeah. And I think there were seasons where even like part of my story is my dad got a brain tumor when I was 16 and he died when I was 25. And so seeing like how much my dad had given up, and then to see it play out in a way that just was unexpected and disappointing, frustrating, and sad to me, was something that I had to work out. So like there was a season of my life where I don't even know if I would fully call myself a Christian. Mm-hmm. Like everyone is going through this like idea of deconstruction right now. I mean, it's like a popular word. Pastors are deconstructing. And it's, in so many ways it's become a popular thing.
Yeah.
When I graduated college, I was really trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Like, I don't want to base my whole life on this like 14-year-old moment where I felt something, right? And if God allowed this to happen to my dad, how much more is he going to forget about me? That was the way I felt. Mm-hmm. And there was a real season where I was just like, Lord, I know how hard it is to do ministry. Like, there's not a lot of fanfare in it. I had no thought in my head that I would ever become like a famous pastor or anything. So it's not like those things motivated me. I know how hard it is. Like pastoring, like my dad pastored a church of just a couple hundred people, and the complaints you get and the things, and COVID was nowhere near. Now it's a different thing entirely. But I was like, I don't want to do this unless I really, know. And so there was like a season and a process of like God revealing himself to me, even in my 20s, that was kind of a confirmation to me that this was the path that I have for you. But I think God speaks in a lot of different ways. He speaks through supernatural experiences. Scripture talks about dreams and visions. He of course just speaks through our passions. And you said, like, I know what I love to do. I'm kind of the opinion that our destiny is probably tied to what we love to do, unless we have had those moments where God's like, do this.
Yeah.
We do see in Scripture where God calls people to things that they don't necessarily like love or want to do, but you also see these moments where like Nehemiah hears the condition of a city, and he hears that the walls were broken down, and he's like, he weeps about it, because he knows how vulnerable the city is that his hometown is in, and he wanted to do something about it. So I think sometimes calling arises out of circumstances too, and so I think it's really a combination between hearing the voice of God, circumstances, points in time, process. It's not necessarily a simple answer.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that you could do is maybe sit down with like a spiritual mentor or someone you trust and just have a conversation about it and really flesh it out. I think a lot of times it is connected to the passions that God places in your heart. And I mean, if we had time, we could probably at least narrow it down to kind of like the areas where because all of us want to see a legacy happen, because our gifts being employed and used to make a difference in the world. And so there's going to be some cross section of that at some point where it may not necessarily be what you get paid to do, but you love it, the world needs it, and it's making a difference. And the good news is you have so many years, and there are different seasons in life where you can try things out. And so life is an experiment.
So that's so true, because if you would have told me, I say this all the time, if you would have told me when I was in the Marine Corps or even high school that I was going to own a hipster coffee shop, I would have laughed in your face, right? Like, especially as being in the Marines, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
No, dude, you're on something, probably coffee that is bad or something. But you touched on it. I want to go back to it because this is something like genuinely people, we've talked about it in the past, but people genuinely have no clue. I can't say people. A lot of people out there that want to criticize, complain, voice their opinion on every little thing. This color's red. Oh no, it's actually a shade of magenta. Whatever, right? There's people out there that always want to have their voice or their constructive criticism, or they think it's constructive when it's in reality it's not. They don't know what it's like to lead people. I know what it's like to lead people. I have no clue what it's like to lead people as a pastor. As a pastor leading people in general, like we just said, like you said, my dad said, as a pastor leading people, that in itself is hard. I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, I don't envy your job at all, because I personally think you have one of the hardest jobs on the face of the freaking planet. You have to be, and we touch on it and we always say it's, we make jokes at it sometimes, but we always say, like as a pastor, you have to be perfect, or you're always held on a higher pedestal, right? Like, because you're supposed to be up here, you're supposed to be better than everyone, you're supposed to have all the answers, you're supposed to have your life figured out, you're supposed to, be the perfect father, the perfect husband, the perfect friend.
Yep.
That's all false. Like, it's impossible to be perfect. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need pastors, right? We would all be God. And so for me personally, like, knowing you and being a friend of yours, being a member of your congregation, and just to have to see and endure what you've endured during the last 2 years of life with COVID, with cancel culture, with all the stuff of the world the last couple of years. Like, again, people don't realize what it takes to lead people. I would love for you to be able to share as much as you would like to share, or not share, what it's been like for you the last 2 years. Because, again, man, there's been times where I've literally said to my wife or other people about you, where I'm like, you guys don't know what he's going through. You don't understand it. And he has to put this front up to show everybody else, like, oh yeah, it's good. But in reality, like, you're human, you're a man, you're going to want to bash a wall down, you're going to want to punch somebody in the face, you're going to want to, like, bawl your eyes out at, did I just waste the last 20 years of my life doing quote unquote God's work? Like, please, like, I would love people to hear it. I love, this is a platform for you to be able to say, hey, like, the last 2 years has been hard. It sucked. It's made me question. It's made me wonder. 'Cause, you know, again, being a member of your church and as a friend of yours and somebody that understands a small glimpse, because what I'm able to do in my business is drastically different than what you can do in our church. I just said so much crap, but just I want you to be able to kind of use this as a time to share whatever you'd like to share. I think people forget that you are a human, right?
Okay, so what you just said, I think, is so important. I think part of the struggle with the Western church or the North American church is, you know, this is a free market, and we're a consumeristic nation. Like, you know, the success of this podcast is people listening to it, you know. Not that just doing something out of passion and pure passion is still so valuable, but so much of what we decide in terms of success is connected to that idea of people consuming it. And the idea of consumption in Christianity is not necessarily entirely bad, right? A community is a place of giving and receiving. Where I think it can get a little within like the Christian conversation, there is this idea of, I'm gonna use a big word, but I'm gonna explain it. It's called contextualization, like where you explain the gospel in a way that the culture understands. On the other side of the spectrum is this word called syncretism, where you go too far. Like where actually the definitions of what you're trying to convey to the culture now veer too far into the culture, and the meaning changes, and now you've got Christianity, quote unquote, but it's like tainted by the culture because the practices and the way you're talking about it, it's too tainted. And I think one of the areas that I really believe that North American Christianity, it's on that line. And I feel like there are some churches that just cross the line where we're trying so hard to reach culture that we become too much like culture. And it's dangerous. And the way that a pastor feels that is when a church is so consumeristic that they stop treating their pastor as a human. It's a big warning sign. And I think in the last 2 years, it has been very easy for us because of technology and things like social media. Anyone can broadcast their opinion, and we're putting our church on blast or our pastor on blast, and we just don't know what they're trying to hold in tension. Because in any church, there's going to be people with differences of opinions. In any church, there's going to be different ways of thinking about things. And you know, in a church that's really reaching people, there's going to be a differences of opinion because, you know, like if you would have asked, you know, the woman who had 7 demons exorcised from her and a Pharisee who are in the same room hearing from Jesus what they thought on a particular issue, you guarantee they're probably not going to have the same opinion.
Yeah.
And yet they're sitting there in the same room at the feet of Jesus.
Yep.
So a pastor's goal is to get a broad group of people to sit at the feet of Jesus. And if you're connecting with someone who has come from the world, right? Like they didn't grow up in the church or they didn't grow up, they might have all these opinions. And where is a safe place for them to sit at the feet of Jesus and learn from him? Yeah. And so like this is like what people are most pastors are trying to hold in tension. Well, in the last couple of years with the polarization of society from political issues to COVID-19 response, just to the weariness of the breakneck change that has happened in regards to the response of that, it's been really hard. I mean, and there have been a lot of moments where I have just felt like done, to be honest with you. I mean, there have been moments, if I'm going to really be honest, where I was like, I mean, we're here in Southern California, so we know what prices of houses are here, you know? I'm like looking at houses in different cities thinking like, why am I working so hard, you know? Why are we struggling so much? And then on top of that, you know, our 75-year-old church, you know, we had our lease broken. And so we had to, in the middle of COVID, find a new physical location for an established church, which is very different than a church plant. And, our established church had sort of a set of expectations that they, had, which were very much tied to our old building and location. So, I mean, for sure, it's been really, really hard. And I think the hardest part whenever someone leaves a church is when you've invested relationally, you end up feeling used because even though the church is more than the pastor, it doesn't always feel like that, like especially when the reason they leave is likely tied to you somehow. And so I feel like there's a sense of personal rejection that you have to grow kind of a thick skin, but you also don't want to become so thick-skinned that you don't care.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want is a pastor who's a sociopath. Oh, I don't care if they're here or gone. Like, that is helpful to a certain extent. Like Ben and I were talking about today, and he's like, at some point you just have to not care anymore. But there's a danger with not caring.
It's true.
Because you're a pastor.
Yeah.
And your job is to care. So it's really this strange place for most pastors to be in. But I know that there's probably a lot of pastors who need to figure out how to get help. About 6 months ago, I could really feel the tension wearing on me. And this was about just like 2 months or about a month after my wife told me that she was pregnant with our third. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have got to get my stuff together. So I actually started getting counseling twice a month. And that has helped just so much. It has added a lot of balance to my life. And I feel like, I don't want to say I'm in control emotionally now, because there's definitely still those swings. But I feel like a lot of it God's really used that as a way of kind of bringing some equilibrium back to my life. And so I couldn't recommend people, here I am, a pastor, right? I'm supposed to have all the answers, but I'm in counseling, getting counseled to try to help me figure out how to balance this. So back to your question, I mean, I think if you treat your pastor like a human, which, if you think about it, that's not actually that complicated.
No, it's not. And that's what blows my freaking mind.
Treat them like a human, not a product. That will go a long ways in terms of them not struggling with that tension as much. It's okay to leave a church. I really do believe that. It's not like we have to sign our line on a dotted line, but treat your pastor like a human. One of the hardest departures was a family that I'd really invested a lot in, and they just wrote a letter to our secretary.
Yeah.
And it was like, dude, why can't we just have coffee? Like, we've had coffee a lot. We've had coffee many times. And I have to, this is part of where, honestly, the human part of me gets a little angry, because it's just like, treat your pastor like a human. Like, if I invested real heart into you, then that's the least that you can do is to give back. Like, have a physical human conversation. But it's, COVID has been a season of shuffling. And I think that's just a part of what God is doing to make a lot of churches healthier. And in the end, I think our church will be a lot healthier because of it. But it's still hard. It's still been a shuffle.
Well, it is, like you said, treat you like a human. And it's, I've told you this, but I've had people, I haven't talked to you about it, but I've had people come to me about stuff that they think he's doing in the church. And I was like, you guys realize, like, it doesn't work like that. Like, the president of the United States doesn't get to decide one thing and it becomes reality. It has to go through a check and balance. Like, yes, you can do a lot as you being the leader of our church or as the president, whatever. You can do a lot, but it's not like one day he's going to wake up and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this. And then it happens. I've had people come to me and be like, can you believe this is what's going on? I'm like, well, I personally, I don't like it, but it is what it is. I understand. I'm having to do similar things within my own business, and I'm not a pastor. I'm not a spiritual leader of people that think you have every answer to every solution and every problem. And my response always was like, you guys, I said at the very beginning, but you don't understand what he's going through.
Yeah.
You can talk all day long from the back of the building in the last seat, right? You can chirp all day long, but until you get on the stage in front of the people and have to make that decision, you don't know what that's like.
And I think I think the path forward for congregations and pastors is to focus on the mission of Jesus. I'll be honest, there have been so many stupid, asinine distractions in the last 2 years. This is what gets me really angry. How easily do we take the bait when it's not about who cares about some of the dumb details that we can't figure out how to get on the same page about? Even if we can't get on the same page, I think we can get on the same page that there are people who are hurting out there that need help.
Yeah.
For God's sake. Isn't that what the church exists for? But we can't stop arguing about things that, I mean, in 20 years, I don't even know if we'll remember this season of life, except for
I freaking hope
it,
not.
it will be a blip on the map, you know? But the mission of Jesus still remains. I mean, and so again, this is in particular for me, how I kind of come back to center. That's center for me. Like, that's center. And I think it's center for every church. It has to be center. There are people that are hurting. Jesus came to help them and to save them and to heal them. That's our mission. So let's forget about all the details that don't matter. I know it's hard though, because it impacts our daily life, and then Sunday comes and things might be a little different or changed up, and it's like, man. But I don't know. I think we are so spoiled, and I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad or shame anyone, but we're so spoiled in America. Go to a third world country, to a church community that doesn't even have a building, that's sitting outside, and the kids are there, and mothers, and they're in there. I mean, I remember being in the Philippines and going to preach at this church up in the mountains, and it was like open air. The church was composed of mostly women with their babies and their kids. There was a couple guys, and I just remember thinking, like, this is the church, but they don't have any of the accoutrements or the the amazing things that we have that we've come to associate with church. Like the really nice buildings or coffee shops, and I think all those things are good. In fact, we're exploring all that. We're using all that to try to reach people. But at the end of the day, church is people, and we can't get caught up in just the wasted time and effort in some of these conversations. That's what has really bothered me in the last couple of years. Let's get back to seeing lives changed by the power of the gospel, and helping people and showing compassion. I think that's where the church will find its rhythm again.
That's a good way to look at it. Just always finding back, going back to your center or your why, or dude. And another question I have too for you, unless you have something.
I was thinking about something. No, go for it.
I was gonna say is, so the last couple of years have obviously sucked for so many people. But again, as a pastor, I couldn't even fathom it. But two is we always are talking about the culture, especially in Southern California, Orange County. We live in a you said it earlier, but a consumer market, or we were talking about it earlier, but everyone wants to go to the newest thing, right? The coolest thing, the church that's the most trendy, the one that has the coolest worship, the one that has sweet photo ops and stuff like that. It's we live in that culture. Us as a 70+ year church going to a freaking hotel and having to set up day in and day out.
It's been tough.
It's you've had to deal with just so much more than even a normal pastor during this time has. How do you personally find, you mentioned the counseling, but how do you personally find, I guess what we were kind of saying before we started, but the spiritual feeding, the way for you to recharge. So for me, as an average person, Sundays are my recharge, right? I go, hopefully I'm spiritually fed. I'm using that one day, even though it's not just the day, but it's the day to remind you to recharge and just really be thankful for what we have. How as a pastor, how do you get that? I've always wondered, because I have Sundays, right? And I have every day, but Sundays are a day Mandy and we can go to church and get fed, listen to worship. I was freaking crying yesterday in worship for no reason. It's just, I just relate that to just the Holy Spirit. Just, I was feeling something. I just started crying, and I started praying for my wife and my kids. Yeah. And it was just how do you get that?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think that this is whether or not you're a Christian, there are rhythms that are life-giving and rhythms that wear you down and break you. And I think one of the beautiful things about the God of Scripture, the God of the Bible, is that he introduces this concept of Sabbath, which is really what you're talking about. It's where you find a rhythm in your weekly schedule where you stop and you reflect, you worship, you're not thinking about the things that are pressing, that are these business issues. And that really was the whole point of the concept of the Sabbath to begin with. It's just trust me, God says to the Israelites, like on the seventh day, and I will make sure you're blessed. But a pastor is no different. And so usually a pastor will take a different day off, where they can do that. But I think the idea of Sabbath, the idea of rest, is where you incorporate, and I would say in your daily, weekly, monthly, even yearly rhythms, sabbatical, Sabbath, rest. So on the daily, like what does that look like to get a good night's sleep? I think sleep is so underrated. It's in my opinion, it's a spiritual discipline. I think the most spiritual thing that you can do sometimes is to take a nap. You need that as a human.
Yeah.
You need to rest. You cannot. Elon Musk is going to burn out if he's working 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, which I've heard his crazy hours, and the guy's brilliant, but it can only work for so long, and then you run out of what I call like life margin. Your body breaks down and you find yourself in a hospital because like you got sick and you got some disease, and like that's when our body recharges. In addition to that, I would say like on a daily basis, I really do try to find time exclusively to spend with God. And I know that this can feel like a burden, but it's not about checking a box like, oh, I read my Bible or I prayed. It's about opening myself up to God's Spirit and then being open to His Spirit throughout the day, because I don't think God really disconnects us from certain parts of our day and then all of a sudden, oh, you're back, It's like God really wants to live life with us. He wants to lead Hidden House with you. He wants to, lead you in your business. Like He wants to do that with you. And so it's like this prayer is this constant conversation. But on a weekly, I think, creating a larger amount of time and space, like I would consider it holy ground, space for reflection, space for worship, I think is integral. And then on a monthly basis, maybe even getting, if you're able to do shorter amounts of time, like a larger amount of time, and maybe even on a yearly basis, do like a prayer retreat. I think figuring out how to incorporate rest and reflection is super important to make sure the axe is sharp. Because you can exert a lot of effort, like you can work really hard, but if the axe is dull, it would benefit you to pause and to sharpen that axe and then go back to work. But it might not seem like it because you stop and you're sharpening this axe, but then for the next 2 hours, you're going to cut a lot more wood down because your axe is sharp. And I think that's what rest does. That's what community worship does. It allows things in our soul to sharpen, because God's doing something in your soul when you're praying for your family and you're crying. There's something that's being worked out, and we don't always. We're such rational beings. We think everything can be figured out with our minds, but that's not true. There's a part of us that is beyond our mind, and that's where I think preaching comes into play, and reading the Bible, and just mining scriptures for that nugget that you can chew on all day, and praying throughout the day. It's the part of our soul that is being sharpened by God to face what we're facing. And if you feel like a hamster in a wheel and you're just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, it could be that you haven't given time to some of these disciplines, and the answer may not be working harder. The answer may be working more strategically and incorporating rest so that you can recharge and be more focused.
So true.
It's been tough.
It is a discipline. It's a discipline. It's just like anything else, like an athlete. It's a discipline, and that's something that we were just talking about right before this, where I feel like sometimes people have this question of like, why does God allow this to happen? Or God did this, and well, He didn't do it. We're humans. We have free will. He gave us that. And like I was saying with our dog, it was, even though he's a dog, it was one of those things where I truly think God was using it as a hey, like, come back to me. Not that we were away, but we were just that hamster in the wheel. At least that's what I felt like. I was just going. God was blessing my family, our businesses, and we were doing all these cool things. And then all of a sudden, it turned into I think it was a learning lesson. It was a time that God was like, hey, you need to remember, slow down. You need to trust me. You need to lean on me. And I always wondered as like a pastor, like how you get that, because I get it when I come to church. I mean, I get you. Obviously, the intent is to have that discipline to get it throughout the week as well. But if I'm being honest, I go through spurts where I get really bad at like digging into the word, and I know it's something that season that we just went through, and then our dog dying. I don't think I opened my physical Bible in months. And if I'm being like honest, like I can admit that I use like my Bible app, and I was like, oh, I read some scripture. That's not spending time in the Word. And it, like I said, a couple months went by, and I was like, I didn't even move my Bible. And then, a dog that was like my part of my family, like suddenly just going, I was like, dude, life is so short that I forget, and I need to have that spiritual discipline. And it took something big to remind me of that. But now it's like, oh, I need to be doing that. So I always wondered as a pastor, I'm just like, dude, that's because there's no one forcing you to do it.
Yeah. It's kind of weird. Like in the last probably 6 months, I've done more funerals than I feel like ever in my ministry. And people often, like if I get back from a funeral and they see me in the suit and they're like, oh, I'm really sorry. And it's funny because funerals have become something that I really enjoy, which sounds so odd, right? Because obviously people are really hurting, but a pastor gets an incredible opportunity at a funeral to talk to people he's probably never talked to, and to remind them the value of life. Because I think that's the ironic gift of a funeral, is it allows you the time to reflect, like, because you think like of of how temporary life is. And even talking about a dog, like dogs become a part of our life, and it's never easy, especially a dog that you love, to see them, move on, transition, to die. And it's really hard, but it forces you to think about the brevity of life. And the beautiful gift that I think Chesty gave to your family is just that reflection. C.S. Lewis said, pain is God's megaphone to a lost and dying world. The beauty of pain is that it makes us think, and it gets our attention, maybe in areas that we wouldn't have, right? We're just going down this path, and who knows where that path would have led. Like when you really think about it, I don't think God causes things to happen, but I think he allows things to happen because, and he uses those things, especially painful things, to refocus our hearts. Who knows where we would have ended up if God hadn't have spoken through those painful circumstances in such a way.
That's so true. It is so true.
But why don't you think we can put that into perspective as humans? Do you think we get caught up in everyday life and day to day, and this is our regimen and this is our schedule, and we don't do that? Because I'm like, man, if I'm being honest, I mean, it's been a long time since I've opened up my Bible. Like I'll go up, I justify it because I will wake up in the morning, do my morning routine, and read the word of the day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's good.
I get that 10 minutes. Yeah, exactly.
But then when poop hits the fan, or I need something, I'm like, God,
you're back in the word.
What's up? Like, help me out. And I don't think that's good, And I've done the whole accountability partner thing, and I'll tell my wife like, hey, call me out if I'm not in my word, and I think now I approach it a little bit different, where I'm more intentional. Like I'll read devotionals to my girls at night when I put them to bed. And sometimes it hits me. Like I posted something the other day because it was about it said "Never Give Up" was the title, and then it went into a whole devotional. But it was like I needed that today. But it's very hard for me to put things in perspective and sit back and say, hey, this is what I need to do. Like I'm really good about being organized. I like things nice and tidy. I know what I have to get done that day. But then if I don't do it at the end of the day, I'm like, dude, you suck.
Yeah.
Like why don't you get that done? Well, then the next day I'm back at it again. I feel sometimes like I'm in that hamster wheel, and I know the answer. I know that I have to get into my word. I know I have to devote more time to God and have relationship with him, but I still don't do it.
This is a big tension. And whenever I talk about like devotionals, I try to think about it from another angle. First, I would say guilt is a horrible, horrible thing. I think guilt is the worst motivator to do something. When's the last time you took your wife out on a date because you felt guilty? Now, maybe she doesn't care, but don't tell her
2
if
days
that's
ago.
the case.
No, I'm kidding.
The reality is, like, for the relationships in our life that we cherish and value, we sort of inherently understand that there needs to be investment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's you can't grow something unless there's investment. And here's the cool thing. God, I don't think God holds this against us. I mean, God knows where we are. He knows where we are, and he's not interested in like us walking around with all this shame and guilt. That's just craziness. I think thinking about it from a different perspective, I try to think about it, and I'm in the situation where I have a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and now a 3-week-year-old, 3-week-year-old, yeah, 3-week-old.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it made sense when I said it. But you have to think about integration. So I mean, I think the fact, Manny, that you when you read those devotionals to your kids, like it hits you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who says that you know that isn't legit, that's not valid? Like that's valid to me. Like God's speaking to you.
Yeah.
So like, forget all that stuff you said about feeling guilty. Like that's amazing. So I think you're integrating. You're doing something that as the priest of your home, you want to integrate in your kids' lives. Like, and I do the same thing, but I do it in the morning. And we read that little Jesus storybook Bible.
Yeah.
There have been so many moments where I'm like reading it, and it's like God is like slamming me. And I'm like trying to fight back the tears, because Harper and Judah, they're looking at me and they're trying to figure out, they're seeing their dad struggle to read this story because I'm reading about this woman who fought through the crowd to touch his garment, and it's bringing back some like emotions. Dude, God's working in that.
Yeah.
I think you need to cut, I think a lot of especially parents with young kids need to cut themselves a ton more slack. We're not in a season of life where we have like hour upon hour of just like sitting around doing nothing. Not that older people necessarily are sitting around doing nothing. So I think thinking through ways to integrate God's word into what you're already doing. I'm not devaluing like that monk thing that we have in our head of us being in a room and us just focused on, that's great. But like just turning on Christian radio driving to work. I mean, there have been a lot of moments where God spoke through a song or, and it's just it's that idea. It's inviting God into life with you. And maybe all of a sudden, and the other thing is it's quality time. I don't want to diminish the value of quantity time, but I think if you have 10 minutes and you're able to give that to the Lord, like put your phone away and really just hone in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, again, back to the idea of a relationship. You tell your wife you love her, but you're looking at your phone. That doesn't go very far.
Yeah.
But if you put your phone down and you're staring at her, like you've got like a soul lock, I love you, and you kiss her, like, dude, that could be 2 minutes, and it could be the best part of her day.
For sure.
And I think that's how God, sees this. I don't think we need to walk around with shame and guilt. I think, guilt, that's the worst motivation. I think it's just, I think it's being intentional about investing in that relationship, but also integrating wherever we can. And I think just get rid of the shame and guilt, because it's not going to do anything positive.
Well, I think what you said earlier, at least for me, really resonated, where it was you have to invite him. You have to invite him in to be a part of your day-to-day. Because I do certain things like driving home because of where we're at. I'll drive home and on the way to the freeway just see like homeless people and druggies, and that it motivates me. I feel really bad because I can't do anything in that moment, but I use that at the same time to motivate me, where I'm like, you have no reason to complain.
Yeah.
Like, am I behind on some bills? Sure. Have I not paid rent in full? Yeah. But I have the opportunity to.
Yeah.
Because of where they're at, either mentally or physically, they don't have the chance. They don't have the opportunity to do it because they're just so messed up, or they're so beat up that they can't even go out and get a job, or like I own my own business. So if I really want to, if I'm being real with myself, like I should probably put in more effort and be like, okay, you need to go get another client because you have X amount to do financially. I think I need to, instead of using that as motivation and looking at all the other people as I'm driving home, I think I need to invite God and put him on the throne and put him in the front seat, as opposed to like a podcast I might listen to, or because I not interrupted. I think sometimes I want things to be perfect, or I want the podcast to work out. I don't want to have millions of listeners, and it's like, well, is that for what reason? Like, is my reason for wanting to do this going to positively impact and either change the world, or is it going to impact the world? Like, what are we going to do with this platform that God's given us to make a positive and lasting impact? And when I look at, we talked about it a couple shows ago, and Ben really helped me out with it, where he's like, stop looking at clients as a dollar sign, and start looking at them from a pure standpoint, to say your talents and your abilities can help this business. You can help them, and look at it from a different perspective and say, I want to help because of what I know how to do. I can help people. I can make an impact, and that's going to help their business and ultimately help their bottom line, which is why they go to work every day. I go every day, bust my butt to go do this. And so I think that's key for me, at least, and I hope for the listeners too, but for me is really inviting him in. Like, there's so much I think, like, oh, I can do this, I can do that, I can. And if I already have that willpower or that stubbornness, like, imagine how much more I can do with God on my side, or God leading me, not even by my side. I have such a hard time being a follower. Like, I want to be a leader so bad, and you're always in that position. Like, I'm a coach. So what do I have? I have players that listen to everything that I say, that want to pay attention, that have to do what I tell them to do. I'm a dad. My kids they don't have to listen to me either, but I'm put in that position. I'm a husband. My wife follows my lead. I'm a business owner. I don't have employees yet, but I'm a business owner, and these I'm in all these leadership roles. So I think of myself. I put myself in that position instead of putting God there, and saying, God, this is you need to be here. How do I do that? Like, help me to follow. Like, I'm not a great follower.
Well, it's hard to follow, especially as a man, you know. And
Yeah.
if you can't admit that, then you're just freaking lying to yourself. But it's hard to be a follower. But I think too, if you're not a Christian and you don't believe in God, like, the whole moral of everything we've kind of said is, like, just slow down, like, realize where you're at. When you're driving, you're seeing all the homeless and the crazy things that can happen to you when you let your life spiral out of control. Slow down. Be thankful for what you do have. Like, a lesson I learned after my dog is, like, it doesn't all this stuff doesn't matter if I'm not doing it for the right reasons. Like, just slow down. And
that's really good.
You know, it's something that I think every single person, Christian or not, whatever you are, it's literally it's slowing down to remember, like, life is so precious and so short that we need to be present, not on your phone. And Devin's been calling me out on this a lot lately, because at night I used to give her a hard time about being on Instagram all the time because she would use it for her business. Now it's flipped. She puts her phone down, and I'm sitting on the couch when I've just been gone all day, and I'm scrolling Instagram to, like, whatever, get caught up for the day, or look at jiu-jitsu videos, or to, you know, literally look at who can we ask for the podcast, like, whatever. It's like, dude, put your phone down. Like, slow down, be present. Don't be, you know, there in presence, but be present. And I know we're running short on time. I could ask you a million more questions, but I mean, ultimately, I just wanted, you know, I want people to hear what it's like for what you have to go through. Life is hard enough. Being a leader is hard enough. Being a person that people look to is hard enough. But going through everything that you've had to go through in this last couple years as a pastor of a church I really just want people to take this one thing away. Pastors are humans. They are not perfect. The church is not perfect. Do not let a bad experience at a church from a jerk off of a person dictate what you believe, like, God is about. Because at the end of the day, and you said it the best, is, like, there are people that are hurting and lost, and our job as Christians, whether you're a pastor or not, is to be a light in the darkness. And remembering that pastors need that also, and to show grace. Like, pastors aren't just designed to be the ones giving grace. Like, they need grace. And it pisses me off when you guys get put on this pedestal and people want to critique and judge and slam, and it's like, dude, forget you. You don't even have one responsibility in your life of leading someone, let alone pastoring a church. I'll say it for you, man. So honestly, just want to say thank you. I look up to you. I appreciate you. I'm excited to see, like, what God does through you and in our church and the season that we're in this wild ride we've been on. It's
crazy.
been cool. It has, because I've seen you from the very beginning to where we're at now, and I truly believe, like, for what it's worth, like, that God's gifted you with just the ability to be able to really just, like, take his word and actually present it in a way of what it says. You're not changing and manipulating scriptures to get people to a deconstruction phase. You're literally using scripture and living your life an example of where people would be like, oh, that's what it's like to live with Jesus. So thank you.
And maybe we'll see Manny.
Yeah, I'll stop being a jerk to you. That's what I took out of this.
So treat people like humans. There
Yeah,
you go.
exactly.
Bottom line.
What do you always ask at the end?
How
Oh,
can
yeah.
people get a hold of you, or get in touch with you or connect with you?
Yeah,
Either
I'd
the
love
church
to,
or
yeah, I'd love to connect with people. Jay Hansen at Mesa.church, but our website is Mesa.church. So we're right here in Santa Ana, but we'll be moving into our new building, which is technically Irvine, but it's right on the other side of the 55.
Mm-hmm.
So at Red Hill and MacArthur, essentially. But you can find out more information on our website.
Yes.
Mesa-
Someone.
say the
Mesa
website
dot-
one more time.
Mesa.church.
Okay, awesome.
Mesa.church.
And then we'll
And
put
then we're
that-
on Instagram and Facebook and all that too.
We put it all in, like, the episode bios as well.
Like the description.
Yeah, but someone should listen
and I
to
have
this.
the socials as well.
Need to take this guy out for a coffee or Red Robin. He likes Red Robin.
Yeah, endless
I'm on this. I'm on this kick though. Chopped salads.
Chopped
So
salad.
I don't know.
wish
I have one
ate
in my
vegetables.
I have one in my bag.
I don't eat
Um,
veggies.
My man.
Well, on that note, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
Bam.
Love you guys.
Bam. And remember, guys, that everything was impossible until someone did it. So, guys, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/The Fight Within Podcast. Find us on all audio platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, anywhere you guys like to listen to it. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for continuing to listen to it and watch it. We can see the growth on our analytics, and just want to thank you guys for supporting us.